The distress signal traveled through the endless darkness of space for months before reaching Earth's outer monitoring stations. It carried with it the desperate voice of a people who had never known war, never understood that sometimes peace could only be bought with blood. Elder Nira's words echoed through the communication. Array, aboard the massive battleship Soul's Thunder. Her alien voice translated into perfect Korean through advanced linguistic processors. The elderly Villani leader spoke with the trembling hope of someone watching her entire world die. Please, whoever receives this message, we beg for your help. The Korthok have surrounded our world. They demand surrender, or they will burn our cities from orbit. We are not warriors. We have never raised weapons against another living being. We seek peacekeepers who might speak with these invaders, who might find words where we have found only threats. Admiral Kim Dae stood perfectly, still in the command center, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, as he listened to the recording for the third time. Around him, the bridge crew of the 7th Human Defense Fleet maintained their positions, but he could feel their eyes on him, waiting for orders that would determine the fate of an entire alien civilization. The tactical display showed the grim reality of the situation. Villania Prime, a blue-green world in a distant star system, appeared as a small dot surrounded by dozens of red markers representing Korthok siege ships. Intelligence reports suggested the aliens were religious fanatics who believed conquest brought them closer to their gods. They had already destroyed 2 other peaceful worlds in the past year. Commander Park Soo stepped forward carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral, this transmission was meant for the diplomatic corps. It came through our channels by mistake. Should I forward it to civilian command for proper handling? Day continued, staring at the display, watching the red dots pulse like drops of blood around the innocent world. He had served in the Human Defense Forces for 35 years. He had seen what happened when diplomats tried to negotiate with fanatics. He had watched good people die while bureaucrats debated and committees formed. Subcommittees to discuss the formation of peace talks. How long until the Korthok deadline? He asked quietly. Lieutenant Yunha checked her instruments. 18 hours, sir. They've given the Villani 18 hours to surrender completely or face orbital bombardment. The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of electronics and the distant vibration of the ship's massive engines. Every officer present understood the mathematics of interstellar travel. Even if they left immediately, even if they pushed their ship's 2 dangerous speeds, they would arrive at Villania Prime with perhaps minutes to spare. Sir, Park pressed gently, the proper channels would be 2. The proper channels. Day interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of command. Would see that world turn to ash, while diplomats argue about jurisdiction and proper procedures. He turned to face his crew, and they saw something in his eyes that made them stand straighter. The Villani asked for peacekeepers. That's exactly what they're going to get. Park frowned. But Admiral, we're not peacekeepers. We're a military fleet. We're equipped for war, not negotiation. A thin smile crossed Day's face, the kind of smile that had made enemy commanders surrender rather than face what came next. Commander Park, we are peacekeepers. We keep the peace by making it too expensive for others to break it. The Villani want someone to talk to the Korthak? We'll talk to them. We'll speak in the only language religious fanatics understand. The Admiral moved to the Central Command console, his fingers dancing across holographic controls with practiced efficiency. All ships, prepare for immediate combat deployment. I want every Marine battalion loaded and ready for ground operations. All fighter squadrons at full readiness. Engineering, I need maximum sustainable speed to the Villania system. Across the fleet, 2,000 of humanity's most elite soldiers began the familiar ritual of preparation for battle. They checked weapons that could punch through armored vehicles, loaded ammunition designed to stop charging alien warriors, and reviewed tactical data on enemies they had never faced, but fully intended to destroy. In the armory of the assault, Ship Bison's Fury, Sergeant Kim Yu helped her squad load their gear. These Marines had fought in the border wars, had faced down pirate fleets and criminal organizations throughout human space. They knew their reputation. When the Marines arrived, the fighting stopped. One way or another, Sarge, Private Namsik, asked as he checked his rifle's targeting system, "What do you think these Korthoks are like?" Kim Yu sealed her armor's power pack with a soft click. "Doesn't matter, soldier. They made the mistake of threatening innocent people. That makes them our problem to solve." As the human fleet jumped into hyperspace, space itself seemed to bend around their ships like reality was making room for something it didn't want to touch. Behind them, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, unaware that its children were racing across the galaxy to teach an ancient lesson about the true cost of peace. The Valani continued broadcasting their desperate pleas into the void, hoping their peacekeepers would arrive with treaties and kind words. They had no way of knowing that salvation was coming in the form of beings who had turned warfare into an art form, and who considered the protection of innocence to be the highest calling of their species. The stars twisted and bent as the human fleet tore through the fabric of space, emerging from hyperspace in a flash of blue light that briefly outshone the system's sun. Captain Li Min stood on the bridge of the scout ship Daegu's Shadow, watching his screens fill with the ugly reality of the situation. Korthok warships hung in orbit around Valenia Prime like black vultures waiting for something to die. Their ships were massive, built for intimidation rather than elegance, covered in spikes and weapon ports that spoke of a culture that worshipped violence. The alien fleet had positioned itself perfectly to rain death on the planet below, while preventing any escape. "Sensor sweep complete, Captain," reported Lieutenant Yunha, her fingers dancing across her control panel. 47 Korthok vessels, in standard siege formation. Heavy bombardment platforms, troop transports, and command ships. They've got the planet completely surrounded. Lee studied the tactical display with the calm attention of a predator sizing up prey. The Korthok formation was textbook perfect for terrorizing a defenseless world, but it showed several weaknesses that a properly trained military force could exploit. These aliens had grown comfortable bullying peaceful civilizations. They had forgotten what it meant to face real soldiers. "They're not even running combat patrols," observed Major Chobin from his position at the tactical station. The scarred veteran had fought in more battles than most soldiers ever saw, and his experienced eye immediately spotted the flaws in the enemy deployment. "Look at their positioning. No overlapping fields of fire, no reserve formations, no contingency planning. They're so confident nobody will fight back that they're practically asking to be destroyed." Below them, Valenia Prime rotated slowly in the pale light of its star. The planet looked peaceful from space, covered in blue oceans and green continents, with cities that glowed softly in the darkness, like scattered jewels. It was the kind of world that had never known the thunder of orbital bombardment or the screams of burning civilians. The human ships descended through the atmosphere in tight formation, their hulls heating as they cut through the thin air. As they approached the planet's surface, the communication channels filled with something none of them had expected to hear: singing. Thousands of Valani had gathered in the central plaza of their capital city, holding what appeared to be flowers made of living crystal that sparkled with inner light. Their voices rose in harmonious welcome, a sound so beautiful and innocent that it made hardened Marines pause in their weapon checks. "Blessed Peacekeepers," came the translated voice of Elder Nira through the ship's speakers. "We have waited for you with such hope. Our greatest speakers and philosophers have prepared words of wisdom to share with the Korthok. Surely, when they hear reason, they will understand that there is no glory in destroying those who wish only to live in peace." Captain Lee felt his stomach tighten as he listened to the aliens' words. These people genuinely believed that their salvation lay in negotiation, that words could stop religious fanatics who had already destroyed entire worlds. They had no concept of the kind of evil they faced, no understanding that some enemies could only be stopped with superior violence. "Captain," Major Cho whispered, "I don't think they realize what they've actually called for. They think we're diplomats." Lee was about to respond when the Korthok made their intentions perfectly clear. Attack ships dropped out of orbit like falling stars, their engines screaming as they dove toward the planet's surface. The lead vessel's communication systems crackled to life, broadcasting on every frequency with the arrogant confidence of predators addressing prey. Pathetic creatures. The Korthok commander's voice was like grinding metal, translated by the ship's computers into words that carried unmistakable menace. "Your weak calls for help have been answered by more weakness. These soft creatures you have summoned will die alongside you. You have one rotation of this planet to surrender completely, or we will burn your cities to ash and sell your survivors as slaves to the mining colonies." The transmission cut off, leaving silence broken only by the sound of Korthok ships taking attack positions above the city. Lee watched a tactical display update as enemy forces moved into bombardment formation, their weapons charging with energy signatures that could level city blocks. Elder Nira approached the human landing site, her large eyes shining with desperate hope, despite the terror that must have been eating at her heart. She was old, even by her species standards, her movements careful but dignified, and she carried herself with the grace of someone who had never imagined that intelligence and reason might not be enough to solve any problem. "Honored Peacekeeper," she said through the translator, her voice trembling with emotion. "What words should we offer them? How do we create harmony between such different peoples? Surely there must be some compromise, some middle path that allows all to live in peace." Lee looked down at the alien elder, then up at the Korthok ships hanging in the sky like instruments of judgment. His hand moved unconsciously to the weapon at his side, a gesture so natural he didn't even realize he had done it. Around him, his crew prepared their equipment with the efficient movements of people who had faced death many times before. "Elder Nira," he said quietly, his voice carrying a promise that the old alien didn't yet understand, "we're going to show them our version of peace." The humans wasted no time with explanations or lengthy discussions about their methods, while the Villani expected diplomatic meetings and peace negotiations. The Marines simply began working with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Major Chobin walked through the capital city's streets like an architect, studying a blueprint, but his eyes saw something completely different from what the peaceful Villani had built, where they saw beautiful gardens and flowing walkways designed for harmony and community gathering. He saw defensive positions and killing fields, where they had created underground route tunnels for their natural movement systems. He saw a perfect network for guerrilla warfare. "Sergeant Kim," he called to his senior non-commissioned officer, "I want observation posts here, here, and here." He pointed to 3 buildings that commanded excellent views of the main approaches to the city center. "Sniper teams with overlapping fields of fire. Make sure they have clear retreat routes through the tunnel system." Sergeant Kim nodded and began marking locations on her tactical pad. Around them, confused, Villani watched as their peaceful city transformed into something they had never imagined possible. The humans moved with purpose and speed that seemed almost supernatural, turning decorative fountains into defensive barriers and converting public buildings into fortress positions. The Villani found themselves recruited into this transformation, though they didn't fully understand what they were becoming part of. Their natural ability to move quickly through the underground tunnel network that connected every building in their city made them perfect messengers and scouts, though the concepts of military intelligence and reconnaissance were completely foreign to them. "Think of yourselves as helpers for aggressive peacekeeping," Sergeant Kim explained to a group of bewildered young Villani who had volunteered to assist the humans. She showed them simple hand signals for communication and basic techniques for moving silently through Their own tunnels? You will be our eyes and ears. When you see the bad aliens moving, you tell us immediately. The Villani nodded eagerly, still believing they were participating in some advanced form of diplomatic preparation. They had no idea they were being trained as an intelligence network for what was about to become the most one-sided battle in their planet's history. Colonel Song-jae stood in what had been the city's cultural center, now converted into a command post filled with holographic displays showing every street, building, and tunnel in the capital. His years of studying human military history had taught him that warfare was not about honor or glory, but about winning as quickly and completely as possible, while minimizing casualties among those you were protecting. The Korthok will expect us to meet them in open battle, he explained to his officers as they studied the three-dimensional map floating before them. Their entire culture is built around the idea of glorious combat between warriors. They have no experience fighting an enemy that refuses to play by their rules. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. The humans would not defend the city in the traditional sense. Instead, they would turn the entire urban area into a maze of death traps, using the Villani's own architecture against invaders, who had no understanding of the terrain they were entering. When the first Korthok landing ships descended from orbit, their warriors emerged, expecting to face frightened civilians, and perhaps a few primitive defenders with basic weapons. Instead, they stepped into a killing ground that had been prepared by people who understood warfare at a level the aliens could not comprehend. Private First Class Nam-Sik lay perfectly still in his concealed position on the fourth floor of what had been a Villani art gallery. His sniper rifle, equipped with targeting systems that could track multiple moving objects simultaneously, had a clear view of the main street where Korthak soldiers were beginning their advance toward the city center. The aliens moved in formation, but it was the formation of conquerors who expected no real resistance. They walked openly down the middle of streets, their weapons held casually, talking loudly among themselves about the easy victory they expected to achieve. Nam-Sik's rifle could kill targets at ranges that exceeded the Korthak's ability to even see him clearly. His first shot took the enemy commander in the head, dropping the alien instantly, before the others could even understand what had happened. He had eliminated 3 more targets and was already moving to his secondary position through the tunnel system. Contact eliminated, he whispered into his communication device. Moving to secondary position. Enemy formation is breaking up. Throughout the city, similar scenes played out as human marines used tactics the Korthok had never encountered. They appeared from tunnels, fired from impossible distances, and vanished before return fire could be directed at their positions. Every shot was calculated not just to kill, but to create maximum psychological impact on the surviving enemies. Elder Nero watched from the underground command bunker as displays showed the battle progressing above. What she saw challenged everything she thought she understood about conflict resolution and peacekeeping. The humans moved with a precision that seemed almost like a deadly dance. Each action flowing smoothly into the next, each strike placed exactly where it would do the most damage to enemy morale and capability. Your people, she whispered to Captain Lee, who stood calmly watching the tactical displays as red markers representing enemy forces blinked out of existence one by one. They move like dancers of death. Lee glanced at the displays, showing his Marines systematically dismantling the Korthok landing force, then looked back at the alien elder with something that might have been a smile. Ma'am, he replied quietly. We prefer the term peace enforcement specialists. Korthok Fleet Commander Vorthok stood in his command chamber aboard the flagship Divine Conquest, staring at reports that made no sense according to everything he had learned about warfare in his 40 years of military service. He had personally overseen the destruction of 17 different worlds, had watched countless civilizations bow before the might of the Korthok Empire, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what was happening on Villenia Prime. His Communication systems crackled with desperate messages from his ground forces, each report more impossible than the last. Warriors, who had never known defeat, were being systematically hunted by enemies they could not see, could not catch, and could not understand. "Commander," his chief lieutenant burst into the chamber, his usually proud bearing replaced by obvious fear. "The 3rd Landing Battalion has been completely destroyed. They never even saw their attackers. The survivors report that the enemy appears from nowhere, kills from distances our weapons cannot reach, and vanishes like smoke before we can strike back." Vorthak's forearms tensed with frustration as he reviewed the tactical displays. Red markers showing his forces continued to disappear from the map at a steady rate. But the blue markers representing the enemy never appeared long enough to target. It was like fighting ghosts that could kill with a touch. "They fight without honor," the lieutenant snarled, his voice carrying the outrage of a warrior who had been taught that combat was a sacred ritual of strength against strength. "They strike from hiding like cowards. They refuse to meet us in glorious battle. How can we defeat enemies who will not fight properly?" High above the planet, Admiral Kim Dae's fleet had emerged from the shadows of space to engage the Korthak Navy in what the aliens expected to be a traditional fleet battle. The numbers should have been hopeless for the humans. 47 Korthak warships against 12 human vessels. But the mathematics of space combat had changed dramatically since. These aliens had last faced competent opposition. The human ships moved like a coordinated hunting pack, their formations shifting and flowing in patterns that confused the Korthak targeting systems, where the alien vessels were individual predators designed to overwhelm through brute force. The human fleet fought as a single organism with 12 deadly components. All squadrons execute Formation Delta 7, Admiral Kim commanded from the Bridge of Incheon's Pride. Around him, his crew worked with the calm efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire careers. Target their command ships first. Cut the head off the snake, and the body dies. The Korthak flagship Divine Conquest suddenly found itself under attack from 3 different directions, simultaneously. Human weapon systems, refined through centuries of technological advancement and actual combat experience, punched through alien shields that had never been tested against competent military engineering. Electronic warfare packages disrupted Korthak communication systems and targeting computers, leaving their gunners firing blindly into empty space. Commander Vorthak watched in horror as his proud fleet was systematically dismantled by enemies who seemed to anticipate his every move. His ships had been designed to intimidate primitive civilizations, not to fight against a military force that understood the true science of warfare. On the planet's surface, Colonel Song had moved to Phase 2 of the human battle plan. His Marines stopped simply defending the Vallani capital and began actively hunting down every Korthak position in the entire system. What had started as a defensive action was becoming a methodical extermination of an invading force. Lieutenant Colonel Park Min led her battalion through the darkness toward a Korthak supply depot that intelligence had identified as a critical target. Her Marines moved through the night like shadows given substance, using terrain and darkness as weapons just as effectively as their rifles and explosives. The Korthak guards at the depot were warrior caste soldiers, trained from birth to fear nothing and to meet any enemy with aggressive violence. But they had been trained to fight other warriors in open combat, not to defend against predators who struck from concealment and vanished before retaliation was possible. "Breach charges set," whispered Sergeant Lim through the communication network. "Sniper teams in position. All units ready for simultaneous assault." The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes. When it was over, the supply depot was a smoking ruin and every Korthak defender was dead. The Marines had suffered 0 casualties and were already moving toward their next target before the explosions had finished echoing across the landscape. "Peacekeeping complete in Sector 7, Park reported to Colonel Song as her battalion disappeared back into the darkness. Moving to Sector 8, estimated completion time, 2 hours. Elder Nira stood in the command bunker, watching displays that showed the systematic destruction of the forces that had threatened her world. The Villani had no context for understanding what they were witnessing, but they could see that their peacekeepers were winning a victory so complete that it seemed almost supernatural. She approached Captain Lee, who stood calmly reviewing tactical reports while the sky above them lit up with the burning wreckage of Korthok ships falling from orbit like dying stars. "Captain," she asked quietly, her translator humming softly in the background noise of the command center, "what do your people call themselves when they practice this form of peacekeeping?" Lee looked up from his displays, glanced through the bunker's reinforced windows at the funeral pyres of alien warships streaking across the night sky, then turned back to face the elderly Villani with an expression of calm, professional satisfaction. "Marines, Elder. We call ourselves Marines, and we're very, very good at making peace." The alarm systems aboard the Korthok Empire's regional command ship, Eternal Dominion, screamed warnings as the massive reinforcement fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Velenia Prime. Fleet Admiral Thrax had brought 120 warships to crush what his intelligence reports described as a minor uprising involving unknown alien mercenaries. What he found instead was a graveyard of twisted metal and floating debris where his advanced fleet should have been. The space around Velenia Prime was littered with the burning wreckage of Korthok vessels, their holes torn open like broken toys scattered by an angry child. "Impossible," Thrax whispered as his sensors showed the full scope of the disaster. "Where's the third battle group? Where are our ground forces?" His tactical officer's voice shook as he delivered his report. "Sir, all contact with surface operations was lost 6 hours ago. Long-range scans show no Korthok life signs on the planet. The advanced fleet appears to have been completely destroyed." Before Thrax could process this information fully, his sensors detected 12 human ships rising from the planet's shadow like predators emerging from ambush. The alien admiral had expected to face desperate survivors running for their lives. Instead, he found enemies who had been waiting patiently for him to arrive. Admiral Kim Day stood on the bridge of Inchen's Pride, watching the Korthok reinforcements, spread out in what their commanders probably thought was an intimidating battle formation. The alien ships outnumbered his fleet 10-1. But numbers meant nothing when your enemy had no idea how to use them effectively. "All stations, execute Protocol 7, he commanded with the calm voice of someone announcing dinner plans rather than the beginning of a massacre. The human fleet moved like dancers, performing a deadly ballet they had rehearsed 1,000 times. Each ship knew exactly where to be and when to be there, their movements coordinated with precision that turned 12 vessels into a single weapon of overwhelming destruction. The Korthok ships were powerful individually, but they fought like a mob rather than a military force. Their commanders had grown comfortable bullying defenseless worlds and had forgotten that real warfare required more than just superior numbers and bigger guns. The battle that followed would become legendary, not because it lasted long, but because it demonstrated such complete tactical superiority that surviving Korthok officers would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain to their superiors how 12 enemy ships had destroyed an entire battle fleet in less than 2 hours. Human weapons systems, designed by people who understood that wars were won through technology and tactics, rather than honor and glory. Carved through Korthok defenses like hot knives through paper, electronic warfare packages turned the aliens' own communication systems against them, spreading confusion and panic throughout their formations. On Velenia Prime's surface, Major Chobin watched through his tactical display as the last stronghold fell to his assault teams. The aliens had built their command bunker according to their own military principles, which made it impressive to look at, but tactically worthless against enemies who understood modern siege warfare. Charges placed and ready for detonation, reported Sergeant Kimyu from her position outside the bunker. Her Marines had moved through the Korthok defensive perimeter like water flowing around stones, finding weaknesses that the aliens had never imagined could be exploited. The explosion that followed marked the end of organized Korthok resistance on Valenia Prime. In less than 18 hours, a force that had conquered 17 worlds had been completely destroyed by humans, who treated warfare as a science rather than a religious experience. Mission complete, sir, Kimyu reported as the smoke cleared from the demolished bunker. All hostiles neutralized or in full retreat. 0 friendly casualties. Elder Nira stood in what had been the Villani capital's main plaza, surrounded by her people who were slowly beginning to understand what they had witnessed. The beings they had summoned as peacekeepers had indeed brought peace to their world, but not through words or negotiations or diplomatic compromise. She looked up at the sky where burning Korthok ships continued to streak across the darkness like falling stars, then at the human Marines who were securing their equipment with the casual efficiency of people completing a routine job. Her translator hummed as she prepared to address not just the humans, but the galaxy beyond, knowing that her words would be transmitted across subspace to listening civilizations throughout known space. We asked for peacekeepers, she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned a fundamental truth about the universe, and you sent us warriors. We thought we understood peace, but you showed us its true price. Peace is not simply the absence of violence. Peace is what exists when good people are willing to do violence to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Admiral Kim's response came through the communication systems clearly, his words reaching across the galaxy to species who had been listening to the transmissions from Valenia Prime with growing amazement and, in some cases, terror. The humans extend this offer to all peaceful species, he announced. We will serve as your peacekeepers when you need us. But understand what that means. We do not negotiate with those who threaten innocent people. We do not compromise with those who choose conquest over peaceful coexistence. We end them as the human fleet prepared to return to their own space. Word of what had happened at Valenia Prime spread through galactic communication networks faster than light itself. Peaceful species began broadcasting new types of distress calls, no longer asking for peacekeepers in general, but specifically requesting human intervention, and in the dark corners of space, where aggressive empires planned their conquests, military commanders began learning a new and terrifying truth about the galaxy they lived in. There existed a species that had turned warfare into such a perfect art that they used it to create perfect peace.